Ready? Greetings. My name is Edmundo Ayala, creator of CrawlerInnovations. Gavin is filming. I'm discussing our first. We have 4 battery packs through our Axial Ryft. Today's our first day to drive it. I did change the Dean's plug. We already talked about that earlier, and I appreciate all the commenters that have been educating me or enlightening me on the use of the better connectors, you know, and that upgrading the connectors or leaving the factory connector that came on this truck on it reduces any initial cogging if you're really trying to get an off throttle or, you know, from a dead stop and trying to be real smooth, because it will cog a little bit, but that's got more to do with the gear ratio than it does the electric connector, quite frankly. So we've driven 4S 2200 packs 60C, and Jamie from our local crawling club, he came over and he drove it for a little bit too, and I think Jamie's experience sums it up the best. He stopped by on his way home after work. He probably drove it maybe 5 to 10 minutes and then just handed the controller back and said, yeah, it's uncontrollable, it's more than I want to drive, and I don't want to break it. And that was that. And that's about what I would have to say about it. Because one of the things that is, in looking through the parts manual, the ring gear inside of here is a 38 tooth, and the pinion is a 13 tooth, which yields you with a 292 gear ratio. For those people that don't know much about gear ratios, a 292 gear ratio is something that's typically seen in a car that sees a lot of highway use. And it's not something that's ever seen that's rock bouncing or off-road. I mean, to give you a better idea, Vanquish Products offers an underdrive gear set that has a 33 ring gear and an 8-tooth pinion, and that yields a 411 gear ratio. And so not only do the trucks perform better, the engines, I mean, if you really want to understand your crawler, start messing with your gear ratios. Understand this stuff, because the lower you can get these, you can get the top speed back by the voltage in your battery packs by running a 3S or 4S or 5S or 6S pack. Because again, if you gear this thing all the way down, a 6S is not going to make it run crazy. But again, you've got to change the gearing. And however, this is just ridiculous, considering that this is the exact same gear ratio. Now, that's different parts, but I'm talking about the numerical teeth that are on the ring gear and on the actual pinion in the axle. These are the same thing that was on the AX10 Scorpion that was released back in 2009. You would have thought that a decade later this company would have learned something about crawling and off-road racing and made this change, because just changing the gear ratio here would have changed the entire experience from this car. And we didn't do anything but change one connector and run the factory battery pack. Everything else is stock. Everything else is stock. So yeah, if I'm a little perturbed, I am. I think this is ridiculous, especially when we move on to the spur gear and the pinion. The spur gear, it's a 53 tooth spur gear, and it's a 17 tooth pinion. Well, when you divide that, you get a 311 gear ratio. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. If you would have asked me, if I would have been consulted, I would have preferred to see a 60 tooth spur and a 10 tooth pinion, which would have yielded a 6.0 gear ratio, double. And the experience on the car with the 4S pack would have been very enjoyable, because what you would have had is basically the way this car is set up. It's like a drag car, point and shoot. You just want to line it up and go, because it doesn't have a lot of throttle control or usable RPM band, so to speak, in the mid-range, to where you really have a lot of control to be able to do it. I mean, yeah, if you're a pro driver and you've got a lot of time, you're going to do it. But if you're someone and this is your first rig, Axial's fooling themselves to think that this was the way to go, because gearing it down would have made a big difference. It would have made this much, much more enjoyable. And which leads me to my point. What do you want us to do with this thing? Seriously, I would like to know your comments. You can even call the shop, send an email. I don't care. But the thing is what do you do with it when you already know that the gear ratio, because it's not like there's aftermarket parts available for this thing. It's not like you can change these parts that I've mentioned easily. Yeah, the spur and pinion could be changed, maybe. because the thing is that Axial fixed the motor placement. So I don't know what's possible on this, like how big and how low we can go. We got to play around on it. So maybe they've already thought about that. I don't know. But it's still kind of interesting because I just feel like there's a lot better design that they could have done here, and they didn't. And the cage is cool. I mean, there's no doubt. One of the main reasons I wanted this is because of the orange. I'm not going to lie. But now that it's here, now that I've already put the skins on it, now that I've driven it in stock form for 4 battery packs, or total, my son and Jamie, I'm good. So let's step over to this car. This car here I built many years ago. There's some videos on our YouTube channel. It's a water crossing car. The chassis itself is aluminum. It was made by Jerry Justice, Death Metal Garage in Missouri. Great person, great guy in terms of his builds, his quality, that sort of thing. And it's so these are Vanquish axles. So they're Vanquish, these are version 2 AR60s. So these have the big bearings in the pinion. And granted, they're not perfect, but they have underdrive gears in them, and so they're 330 gear ratio. And again, when going back to this is 292, and at least this is 330. And the reason by underdriving it front and rear is to try and get the wheel speed up as much as possible, so that, because this was built for crossing water, so I'm trying to get this paddle to make sure that it's right on top of the water at all times. And so the actual transmission that's in this truck is an SSD high-speed deal. And I don't know the numbers and the ratios on all of this at the moment, because we just pulled it off the shelf, because frankly, in the last snowstorm that we had in February here in Texas, that really unusual one, I got to play with this thing. I was running it on 6S, and I finally burned up the ESC. So the thing is that these axles could fit under this truck pretty easily, especially with dinky links. These are made for the AR60s, and what it does is it mounts the steering servo right on the axle tube, just like how this is. And by running these front and rear, well, of course, we're going to make a 4-wheel steer buggy if we go this route, because that only makes sense. In terms of the transmission, though, I would prefer to go to we've got an Axial, or I should say Vanquish 3-gear. So it's got all the Vanquish gears inside. It's got a 60-tooth Robinson Racing spur on it. And then these are the CrawlerInnovations lightened and extended transmission outputs. And the whole purpose of extending these guys is that it moves your drive shaft away from the spur gear, so that you can run a bigger spur gear, thereby gearing down, which is going to just give you maximum torque. You'll notice, trust me, gear down, volt up, you'll notice a big difference in how your cars perform, how the batteries last. Just the whole experience gets a whole lot better. I think that covers most of it. We've covered the gear ratios, we've covered this other vehicle. So, I mean, other than, I'm grateful that Axial built this thing. I mean, it is what it is, but I guess the main point is do you really want to go out and spend $500 on it? And is it going to be a $500 experience? Is it worth doing? Because no, for me, no. You know, yeah, I got this for a little over dealer cost, so I didn't pay full retail for it, and I'm still telling you, nah, you know, it is what it is. But it is a platform that could be built from, but not everybody has that kind of budget or that kind of mindset. Like, they want to buy something and put a bunch of other parts or different platforms in it. So you've kind of got to consider that, which is the whole purpose of making just an honest review. You know, there's no hate here, because again, I benefit from this in terms of the tires. Honestly, the rubber feels like wheelbarrow tires, you know, but it's a firm enough rubber that it works really well with these factory foams, because yes, it pizza cuts. I mean, the tires really balloon, but at the same time, overall, it holds itself up well. It doesn't just go over and immediately fall over. It does need a sway bar, so it got pretty annoying to Jamie how much it was turning over. But again, that kind of comes with drive time and experience too. So everybody's experience and level is going to vary. It's just life. So, but we're going to have some videos, because you can put some Crawler Innovation foams in these, which would make a difference in terms of how they perform and cut down on the ballooning. So you would definitely notice a difference there. Another thing, Gavin pointed this out one of the, they put 2 shock mounts here, but you can't actually run this shock here because it hits the sway bar. If you had a sway bar, and oh well, it hits the mount anyway too, so it's fixed. So to think that you can run dual shocks here or some other thing without changing it, yeah, because
it's not possible.
Not really possible. And the reality is the sway bar is going to do more than a second set of shocks would. So, like, kind of where is that? When's that going to be available? And the same goes like with the gear ratios in here. Like, what are they really going to offer? Because to me, if they're starting out with 3813s just like they did in 2009, that pretty much tells me we're only going to have overdrive, standard, and underdrive. And you don't want overdrive gears, especially in a situation like this, because they have the worst gear mesh. The 36-14 pinion don't mesh well because they cut the ring gear down, and then the pinion gets bigger. It doesn't work. So the 330s are what's going to have the maximum amount of strength, especially if it starts to strip out in this area. So kind of got to wonder, what are they going to do? How's that? And in terms of the transmission and looking through the manual, it's just essentially a 3-gear trans. So it's not like there's a lot of reduction in that. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a criticism. It just these kind of, it is what it is. But with this flat skid, you've got a lot of options. But one thing that has to be considered, oh yeah, Gavin's pointing this out here, is this is the one thing. I mean, it's not
3 batteries in the links.
4 batteries.
The rod end stretched, but it happened before the 4th one.
Okay, so I mean, there you go. It popped back in, but I guess these are some things you can expect. It was kind of odd to pull it out and not see the rod ends seated down, so to speak. There's some gap between the rod end and you can see some threads. I don't know if that's an issue by any means, but it was just. But we didn't have anything else bend or break on us. The servos seem to be like when it was taken, when this car was on the rocks or when it experienced any of the rocks on the hill climbs, this guy was exposed. The servo was getting hit. So I don't know how durable that location is going to be, or if just a guard alone is all that's needed. But and if you, depending on the transmission that could be installed, this is kind of included with the skid. So if anything that's going to be center diff, at least with this skid and trying to use this chassis, this compromises your strength if you take it out. So AR60s would definitely fit because they're already in alignment. So I don't know. Let us know what you guys want to see. Because if we keep it in stock form at this point, I'm thinking JB Weld in all 3 diffs. Just lock this thing all the way up like a real bouncer would be, locked up from the get-go, and change the gear ratio as best we can, and then go try it, see what it does. But I mean, then we could do that, lock it all up, see what it does, change the gear ratio as best we can, do a video on that, and then I guess go from there. Or we just scrap it, pull it out, put the AR60 stuff in with the dinky links, the Axial VP 3-gear trans, and go see how we put some better rims and tires on and go from there. Because it looks like it would be set up to handle some of these other axles. So let us know what you think. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your support. Thanks for purchasing Crawler Innovation parts and for supporting the Activated Outlaw competition crawler rule sets. Have a good day.